very good evening to you, and thank you very much for making time to join us on this edition of Spectrum, coming to you live on Radio 1 FM 90. We're also broadcasting on our website, which is www.radio1fm90.com. While on that website, you click on the icon with the word Listen Live. We're also live on the different radio listening apps, which can be obtained from the Google stores of your smartphone. You download any, and you look for Radio 1 FM 90. And as long as you have an internet connection, you'll be able to listen to us. There's also another option. That's via DSTV. Radio 1 is on DSTV, and its audio channel there is 897. This evening, we'll be looking at the human rights-based approach to implementation of the laws. Well, it has been said a number of times that Uganda has very good laws, very good policies, but sometimes the problem is implementation. And this has been one of the key issues that our stakeholders who are fighting for protection and preservation of human rights have also raised. They have insisted that there is need to have a human rights-based approach in the implementation of those existing laws to be able to deal with the vices that continue to surface, that are always annually captured in different reports, including the ones of the Uganda Human Rights Commission, other independent NGOs, and even international human rights watchdogs. So this evening, we'll be trying to understand the human rights-based approach to implementation of the laws and what exactly it entails as we continue with the campaign to safeguard human rights in our country. Do not forget, tomorrow is International Press Freedom Day. Journalists will be commemorating that day, and it's also one of the issues we will be touching on during our discussion today. I have a panel of three. Mr. Isaac Ogwal, Program Manager at the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. That's the Kampala office. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, moderator. Thank you.
Also in studio, Ms. Rose Mary Kemigisha, Senior Human Rights Officer at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, moderator, and good evening, listeners.
Mr. Robert Mugisa, Senior Program Officer at the Human Rights Center, Uganda, is our third panelist. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, Ken, and good evening, listeners of Radio 1. Thank you very much for having us in studio today.
And I do encourage you, listeners, to follow this discussion and also contribute by sharing your views via the WhatsApp line 0703 090 090. Time allowing, I'll also open the phone lines for you to actually call in and share your views. My name is Kenneth Lukwago Anderson, your host. Let me begin with you, Mr. Mugisa, Senior Program Officer at the Human Rights Center, Uganda. We are here this evening looking at a human rights-based approach to implementation of laws. What exactly do you mean when you talk about human rights approach to implementation of laws?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kenneth Lukwago Anderson. Thank you always for keeping us updated. And today, it's us who are sitting here with you to, of course, share those insights. Like you've rightly said, my name is Robert Mugisa. I work with the Human Rights Center Uganda, which is an NGO that focuses on promotion and protection of human rights, but specifically looking at the protection of the rights and the work of human rights defenders in Uganda. It's among the many NGOs that really focus on human rights defenders. And we appreciate the leadership of Madam Margaret Sekaja. We appreciate all our development partners who have been able to support this work. Going on to the topic of the human rights-based approach to implementation of laws, we have to begin from the point of human rights before the best approach. And I know we have some experts who are in that line of the best approach, but speaking briefly, human rights are natural entitlements that accrue to all of us, you and myself, by reason of being human. And our listeners out there, when we talk about human rights, it's a concept that has developed over the years from time immemorial, and we look at examples of rights that are really documented in the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, rights that are documented in the UN declarations, the UDHR, which is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. And those are the rights that include the right to life, which all of us have, the right to personal liberty, the right to own property individually and in association with others, the right to movement, the right to education, the right to access medical care. All these are examples of rights. And we are also talking about principles like human rights are universal, meaning they belong to all of us every time, everywhere. Human rights are inalienable. We are born with them and no one can take them away from us. Inherent means that at the time of birth, at the time of being born, each of us has rights. We say that human rights are indivisible, interdependent, and that means that you cannot deny a person one right, because if you do that, then you're touching even other rights. And then lastly, we are saying that human rights are enjoyed on the basis of non-discrimination. We do not look at black, white, tall, short, educated or not. Human rights cut across. And that's what we are trying to elaborate today. But specifically, I think Rosemary will be coming in best with the rights-based approach. I just want to let this pass that people who defend human rights are called human rights defenders, like I said earlier. And that means anyone who alone or in association with others, Kenneth, if you are alone or you join with us, as long as we are doing actions or undertaking actions that promote human rights, then we have become human rights defenders. And our focus is on the purpose of saying that let us work within the available laws, which we are going to be talking about. Let us work using peaceful means without violence. Let's also work within a known context without crossing lines. And also let's work knowing that at the end of the day, everybody deserves better. So those are some of the yardsticks that we look at for us to qualify as human rights defenders. Much as we are saying anyone out there can be a human rights defender. So let's join the movement of defending rights for all of us.
All right. Let's go to Rosemary. When we talk about a human rights-based approach in implementing laws, what exactly are we looking at?
Thank you very much. Before I get to the human rights-based approach, let me just say that oftentimes when people hear the word human rights, their antennas go up. There is something terrifying about human rights, but I'm here to dispel that. Human rights is all that is required for the human being to live in dignity. Nobody comes from America, Anderson, to tell you that you are hungry.
Nobody.
Nobody tells a baby to cry when it comes out of the womb. So these are natural
occurrences,
requirements for a human being, every human being, to live in dignity. So what has simply been done is to put this in black and white, put it in our constitution, put it in our laws, put it in international treaties. It is simply acknowledging that human beings need this and allocating responsibility for who should ensure that all human beings, irrespective of any difference, that they enjoy their rights and dignity. Now, having said that, the human rights-based approach is simply to put the human being at the center of whatever we do. This show, Anderson, it's not about us talking here. It is about how will the people out there listening to us enjoy their right to information, enjoy the platform, their right to speech, enjoy their right to freedom of expression. That is what we are talking about. That's the human rights-based approach. Whatever you do, just put on a lens of human rights and look at everything in terms of the well-being of a human being. And that will be the human rights-based approach. There are, of course, frameworks. There are structures and infrastructures for the implementation of the human rights-based approach, but it is all about are we achieving human rights? Are we realizing human rights for everybody at the end of the day?
Mm.
Basically, that one.
All right.
So when you are here hosting this show, ask yourself, are my people out there, have they exercised their right to information? Then you can judge yourself.
All right. Let's judge ourselves here. We have the laws in place, and probably I will use Mr. Gwal, whose organization actually deals with issues of torture and rehabilitation of the victims. We have laws in place. We have a law that is supposed to help us deal with torture victims, and we have so many other laws, including the Human Rights Enforcement Act, which is one of the newest laws as far as human rights issues are concerned. Let's use the example from your side, Mr. Gwal. Is there human rights-based approach in implementation of these laws?
Yeah, thank you very much, Anderson, and thank you very much, listeners. I am Ogwal Isaac. I work for the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. My organization actually has the mandate to treat and rehabilitate victims of torture. Now, when we talk about torture, sometimes it is important we let our listeners know what torture is. So in a simple term, just torture is an infliction of severe pain, and this pain is either physical or psychological to anyone, and anyone can inflict torture. You can inflict torture, I can inflict torture. But torture is done for so many reasons. One of the reasons as to why torture is done, one is to get information. Two is to force a confession for you to accept what has happened. Three is to cause fear. Four is to punish you, and then to intimidate you as well. Now, when you ask about torture, whether torture exists or not, when you look at our statistics as ACTV, yearly over 1,000 people walk into our 4 centers to receive treatment and rehabilitation. That is justification enough that actually torture exists. But also when you look at the statistics of other organizations, like the government's own organization, like the Uganda Human Rights Commission, when you go to their website, they also talk to issues of torture. That means torture is actually there. Torture is prevalent. We have also seen in the media houses, there's I think a TV program that normally shows acts of torture and all that. So torture actually exists, but it is important to know that even when torture exists, there is a law against torture, what we call the Prohibition and Prevention and Prohibition of the Torture Act. This law came in place in 2012, but also there is a regulation to that. And this law, when you look at it, it talks about torture, it defines what torture is, how to report torture, what should be done in terms of remedies, in terms of punishment that should be done to someone who has tortured. But the PPTA, or the Prevention and Prohibition of the Torture Act, comes from the Constitution of Uganda. You know, under the Constitution we have Articles 24 and 44 that talks about torture, and it makes torture actually a criminal act. It makes an act of torture actually something which is a violation of our rights, and that is why today we are talking about violations of human rights, violations of rights. So torture actually exists.
All right. Yes, Mr. Mukisa.
Just to add on the aspect of the laws that we have and whether the rights-based approach is being used. My colleague Isaac has talked really about the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act of 2012. But you know, the Constitution is the supreme law, and therefore any other laws that are crafted that are inconsistent with the Constitution are null and void. So we usually use that standard to ensure that all our laws that go through Parliament, and as you know, currently we have the NGO Amendment Bill that is, you know, through Parliament and could be waiting assent by the President. Such laws must have a human rights compliance test, meaning that whatever law we have, we are talking about, one, the PPTA, two, we are talking about the Public Order Management Act, which has gone through the Constitutional Court, and some sections have been nullified. but we are also discussing the public order management standards that must be followed, and HRB has to be applied. The third law we are looking at critically is the Human Rights Enforcement Act of 2019. So those three major laws are what we are looking at, amidst many other laws that we have in Uganda. Mention the Penal Code Act and all others that touch aspects of human dignity and human rights. So when we say, is there HRB in handling or implementing
Of
these
these
laws?
laws.
We could rightly say that yes, there is, but to a large extent, we are seeing still a lot is lacking. So it's a 50-50 situation for us as we continue to monitor the implementation of these laws. Why? When you look at the current status of justiciability of rights, the judiciary is trying its best. But in reality, you find that many cases of human rights violations, let's talk about torture. The courts still handle torture under cases of assault, grievous harm. Those aspects are within the penal code, and with criminal liability and tests, you have to prove certain situations that this actually happened.
Meaning the law which was put in place is not actually being used.
And that's the reason for the advocacy of the Coalition Against Torture in Uganda. There's an entire coalition which struggles or works to see that the PPTA and the regulations are followed. But still the cases, I know you're a journalist, Ken, you'll find that the cases which have come through on cases of torture, on justiciability of rights, people have been tortured and have ended up in courts and got judgment and rulings in their favor are still very low. And
even those that get those rulings, the compensation does not come on time.
Exactly. Rosemary is here from the commission. We know that the commission has tribunals that sit and make sure that people get justice. So the rulings that are made, or the orders that are made from the commission for people to get compensation, are they lying? We know that the commission gets an annual facilitation on their budget to compensate victims, for example, of torture, so that money is still meager. That's what I believe. And that's our advocacy, that could the commission get more funding if it's there.
Where would that funding come from?
Exactly. Now, that's where we're looking at. Of course, we know there is the consolidated fund, and the commission is an entity established under the constitution. So by speaking like this, we are saying, government, the state, could you please facilitate the commission even more? Could you facilitate the judiciary even more to compensate such people, so that we can say, okay, now the laws are being implemented using the rights-based approach.
When the Prohibition Against Torture Act was actually passed, there was joy that individuals who do the torture itself will be culpable, will be able to pay, so that the yoke on the taxpayer is actually taken away. Because one of the things I don't understand, the person who has been tortured is already a taxpayer. They have contributed to the consolidated fund, and the same money from the consolidated fund is actually being used to compensate them. It becomes a little bit funny. Rosemary,
Okay, let's
hear from you. What do you think could be the problem? Why these laws are not being properly implemented, like Mr. Mugisa has said?
Let me first take you back a little bit. If we are using a human rights-based approach, we should be able to put attention on the process as much as the outcome. And what I was saying here earlier, we are complaining because people are not getting compensated, but they have passed through a process. They have been awarded, but if they are not getting compensated, if you look at that from a human rights based approach, then there is a problem. So the processes must be looked at, because you cannot violate human rights in the process of protecting or promoting human rights. So the process is really important.
So the process should be conclusive.
Yes, it should come. The process should come to the logical conclusion, and that is somebody getting compensated. Now, under the human rights-based approach, they are duty bearers and they are rights holders.
Okay.
Rights holders is all of us. Duty bearers are those people who have an additional responsibility to ensure that you and I enjoy our rights. So they are clearly defined under the human rights-based approach. So you know who the responsible person or entity or the responsible quarters are in this particular human rights issue.
For example,
And that's very critical for accountability.
let's look at some examples.
Uh-huh.
The duty bearers.
The duty bearers.
Mm.
We are talking here about compensation of people because they have been tortured. The duty bearer is this policeman or security agent or parent who is responsible for protecting me but is now violating my right by torturing me. So this duty bearer is accountable because they represent the state. The state is the one responsible for our rights. Now, you rightly said that of recent, the anti-torture law came with individual liability.
And not just recent, about 15 years ago,
Yeah.
if I may remember.
But
we have not
I can
had
also
people being
tell
held.
you that the Human Rights Enforcement Act is even more progressive. So increasingly, the legal framework is assigning individual responsibility. Because people were hiding behind the state. Vicarious liability is what they call it. So initially, like the first 10 or 15 years of the commission, compensation was being paid by government, by the state. Now, under these recent laws,
Compensation was actually being paid by me and you.
yes, our tax,
Mm,
our
our
taxes,
tax,
yes. Now, something I need to explain a little bit here. Compensation is a mandate of the Ministry of Justice. The Commission awards in the tribunals. The Commission of the Ministry of Justice handles compensation. So the cases from Uganda Human Rights Commission, from the courts, wherever they are, they all line up in the Ministry of Justice for compensation. If you don't use the human rights-based approach, because the compensations are many, of many kinds, if you don't use the human rights-based approach, because under the approach, you pay special attention to the vulnerable, the marginalized, the people who need critical help. If you don't use the human rights-based approach, you can just put all these people who are claiming compensation in a line, and you start paying one by one. By the time you reach somebody whose entire means of livelihood, for example, was taken, somebody is already dead by the time the compensation comes.
All right. Now, we are talking about duty bearers. Let's look at their responsibility in dealing with torture. Have they been forthcoming, Mr. Gwal?
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. When you talk about duty bearers, I think their role is so much important in ensuring that human rights is promoted, human rights is actually protected. Now, when you look at the duty bearers, we have Parliament, for example. Parliament is the legislative arm of government, and Parliament is tasked with the responsibility of passing laws, and laws that should really stand the test of time.
And in this case, we agree they passed the laws.
Yes, laws that are really to standard, to regional and international standard. And I think the role of Parliament should not only stop at passing laws, but to ensure that these laws we pass are really implemented. When you see the role of Parliament, Parliament appropriates money both to the judiciary and even the executive. So Parliament should ensure that the judiciary is actually doing its work when the appropriation is done. And then also when you look at the role of the judiciary, is actually to dispense justice. Most times we have seen people talk about justice delayed. Sometimes cases of torture take so long to be adjudicated. Sometimes even when they are not taking long, we have heard of the DPP coming to have interest in certain cases. And when the DPP comes and says they are having interest in certain cases, sometimes we have seen those cases not going forward.
They are withdrawn.
Yeah, sometimes those cases are withdrawn. So the judiciary has to be really tasked with that role of ensuring that justice is actually dispensed. One other body that is so much important we are talking about here is actually the executive. And I really thank the executive, the president, for example, for passing out this law.
For signing them.
Signing this law,
Mm.
actually,
Mm.
the PPTA. But when the law was signed, we are not seeing the law biting. And some people have come out to say the president wrongly signed the law because he was misadvised, simply because the law was targeting security agencies, which is not true. This law is not actually targeting security agencies. This law is actually targeting this person, me and you, if we are in the wrong side of the law, if we have tortured someone. This is what the law is targeting, not security agencies per se. So what we need from the executive, actually the political will, and when that political will is there, I think this law will be used, and I think the executive shall play its role in ensuring that perpetrators are really actually brought to book.
All right, Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90. Our topic of discussion today, the human rights-based approach to implementation of laws. We are discussing this in the context of promoting and preserving human rights in our country. We are going to go for a break. When we return, we'll conclude the discussion on the issues of human rights-based approach, but also shift our gears to look at the issues of press freedom. Tomorrow, we'll be commemorating International Press Freedom Day. There are issues there also to do with human rights, how journalists and media houses are actually finding it, how they are finding the environment under which they are actually working, keeping in mind that it's their constitutional obligation and mandate to also play a key role as human rights defenders in that particular regard. Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90 will continue after this break.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90.
Thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum live on Radio 1 FM 90. Today we are looking at the human rights-based approach into implementing laws that help us to safeguard and promote human rights in our country. My guest, Mr. Isaac Ogwal, Program Manager at the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims, that is in the Kampala office. Ms. Rose Mary Kemigisha, Senior Human Rights Officer at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Mr. Robert Mugisa, Senior Program Officer at the Human Rights Center, Uganda. Now, we have the laws in place, like you said, about 3 important laws, but also the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda under Chapter 4, which promotes and safeguards human rights of different types. It seems from the discussion we have on the table, we are neither here nor there. Like you said, we are 50-50. So what do we need to do to be able to achieve that mark where I would say actually our laws are working and the perpetrators are being brought to book? Because if we don't do that, we send the wrong signal.
Thank you. First of all, it's the will, the will of the duty bearers. Rosemary has really talked about duty bearers. People who have an added role. Because, Ken, at one point you are a rights holder, but like she said, at one point when you go back to your home and you look at your wife and children, then you're a duty bearer. You have the duty to make sure that these people enjoy their rights and have their dignity as human beings who are under your care. So the first thing is the will itself. If all of us wake up every morning, if a judge, a magistrate, wakes up every morning with this will of making sure that cases brought before them are handled in time, despite the fact that we lament about resource envelopes being limited, we've seen duty bearers who are really above the mark, who give in their best to offer justice, to make sure that these laws are implemented to the letter. But also speaking from the angle of the lawyer and fellow lawyers out there, we have a duty really as counsel to prepare these cases based on the standards that there should be. And that means we need to do a lot of research and understand where each case falls, under what law each case falls. And as we argue these cases, let's make sure we point the courts to the actual laws that we are referring to, beyond even the cases that are cited where some of these cases have been judged or ruled before. So, one, the duty bearers themselves; two, the people in the justice chain, including the lawyers. As we prepare to present these cases on behalf of the clans, we have the duty to make sure that we point to the particular laws that we are talking about. And of course now, the Human Rights Enforcement Act, like we are saying, a 2019 law, many of us have the task to really study these laws. And that means there is a lot of sensitization that has to be done as a third element. Let people be sensitized. I saw when this law was passed, the commission, Human Rights Commission, went to different regions of the country, sensitizing the public. Organizations like CEPIL went around the country, sensitizing people, including duty bearers, about this law. So sensitization is going to continue, like we are doing, to make sure that people understand these laws, so that there is no failure, or there is no lamentation when we come to speaking about their implementation. So those are some of the areas that we need to focus on in terms of what has to be done to make sure that these laws are well implemented by the duty bearers.
Rose, your closing remarks on this particular issue of human rights-based approach of implementing the laws.
Okay.
What would you say? What would you want to see as the commission?
Okay, let me first give credit where it is due. The Human Rights Enforcement Act is a very good law. No wonder it came from the Human Rights Committee of Parliament. So I think it incorporated the human rights-based approach, because it assigns individual responsibility for human rights violations. It has also taken away technicalities in filing human rights complaints in court. For instance, the judicial officer has a duty to actually take down your complaint in the court language. You can come and make your complaint in any language. The judicial officer has the responsibility to reduce what you are saying to a technical complaint in court. So I think the will was there when this law was made. Now, I think this law needs to be tested a lot more. There is something that happened in, if you are investigating, if you are handling a criminal matter, and a complaint of torture comes up in court, the proceedings are stayed. And
They are supposed to be stayed.
They are, yes, under the Human Rights Enforcement Act. They are stayed.
They are supposed to be stayed.
They have been. There
is a reason why I'm saying that.
Well, one or two judgments have come from the courts already, and some suspects were cleared of the criminal case just because they were tortured in the process of arrest and interrogation and everything. So if that's why I'm saying it needs to be tested a little bit more, but importantly, it needs to be disseminated. People need to understand it and appreciate it. It is not only us, the beneficiaries, the rights holders, it is also the duty bearers that are supposed to implement that law. But what I can say lastly, all human rights come with duties and responsibilities. The cardinal responsibility of every rights holder is to respect the rights of others. So even if it's not a duty bearer, you as a rights holder, you will have a responsibility to respect the rights of others. If we went back there, maybe we wouldn't even be here discussing issues of torture and so on. So I think what is important is for the implementers of the laws to appreciate that it is for the well-being of the human being,
Mm.
so that the process doesn't stop somewhere.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Let's hear from Mr. Ogwal. Your closing remarks on this issue.
Yeah.
As people who are fighting against torture, what would you like to see?
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. As people who are fighting torture, my remark on this topic is going to one of the duty bearers, that is the police. You know, the police is charged with investigating cases, and when the police is investigating, we have seen most times the penal code is used instead of torture. We hear of assault, grievous body harm. But we request the police that in their investigation, because the law is already there, let them use some of these laws we are talking about in their investigation. But also we request the police to expedite the process of investigation and also make the outcome of this investigation known to the public. Most times we have seen cases being investigated and then they are put there on the shelves. We don't know what is going on. So my request is to the police to make some of those findings public.
All right. Let's now shift our gears and look at the issue of press freedom. Tomorrow, Press Freedom Day, and I'll come to you, Mr. Mugisa. Very quickly, what does press freedom mean to you as an individual, but even the organization that you represent here?
Thank you, Anderson. Press freedoms. Again, from the time we started, we talked about the concept of human rights. And Article 29 of our Constitution rightly speaks about the right to freedom of expression, includes the freedom of the press, the media. We also have the right freedom of assembly, association, and many other associated rights. So press freedom for me is about letting the press work freely. It's about letting the journalists work freely. It's about letting the media houses operate freely without any hindrance. And Uganda, like we are talking, has laws that relate to press freedoms, the media, the laws that relate to the media. And in terms of duties, media owners, media house owners, including the really Radio 1, FM 90, Akabozi, and others. We know you're regulated, you are working under the law, like we said, as human rights defenders, which means that the state, which is on top, which is at the apex, has to look into the laws in place, number one, but also ensure that the regulations have a rights-based lens, like we are saying. So if a media house owner has fulfilled all the requirements and they are on air, they are free to operate, the yardsticks, the standards have to be followed, and that is the duty of the state to make sure that it monitors, like we are seeing Uganda Communications Commission really does its work and places the duty on these owners, people who publish information, to make sure that they publish the right information. So as long as these standards and yardsticks are followed, let the media be free to operate. What we have seen in the recent past is where probably the requirements are in place, the people are doing their best to operate within the law, but again the hand of some duty bearers comes in to stop these people from exercising their rights. Specifically talking about tomorrow, World Press Freedom Day, means that we should see journalists tomorrow waking up, celebrating their liberty to operate in a country where freedoms are allowed for them to, pick their cameras, go and record information, share it. Because, Ken, you know very well that as we leave this studio, we are going back home, and probably we are waiting for the 9 p.m. News. That's the work of journalists. And what we desire to see is, can we have this credible reporting coming through? Can everyone sit in their home and tune into the radios and know what is going on? Because the role of journalists cannot be underestimated at any point. So for us, World Press Freedom Day, especially for tomorrow, as we look at the international theme, which really talks about bringing the truth, the media being responsible for bringing the truth to the public, and the fact that they have to work freely. For us, we are praying and hoping that no journalist will be brutalized, no media house will be closed for no reason. If we search and find that indeed there was an error, let there be a rights-based approach to sit with these media houses, to sit with these people who have erred and tell them their wrongs, but also give them a chance to continue operating. So that's what we mean by press freedoms. If we are able to buy our newspapers and read them, we should be able to read information, be informed. My colleague Isaac talked about the police investigating and making sure the reports are published. But in terms of the laws, we also know that when we talk to the police leadership, there is the aspect of the article in the Constitution that talks about freedom, the right to access information. There are some standards that have to be followed, and when you talk to some of the leaders at the police institution, they say, yes, we have the right to freedom of, the right to access information, but there is some information that you have to apply for. You have to follow the law in order to access that information. The public has to be made aware that much as you have the rights, Rosemary has talked about the obligation. Be informed that there is information which is really public, but there is also information which you can apply for if you're the person who is affected to receive that information.
All right.
Still, all those are issues about our rights and responsibilities.
Let's hear from Rose, the Human Rights Commission.
Yeah, Rosemary is burning to salute fellow journalists on World Press Freedom Day tomorrow, because we are heroes. We do a lot of things.
I didn't know you were a journalist.
The responsibility of journalism is to enable every member of society enjoy their rights. Actually, press freedom, you can call it, it underpins all the other rights, because press freedom is not a right in itself. It is part and parcel of freedom of speech and expression. So really the journalists actually hold this right in trust, because it is just the right of everybody of speech and expression. So journalism provides the platform, journalism provides information, journalism exposes matters of national interest, and in the process it is fulfilling two key principles of the human rights-based approach, which is participation. You can't participate if you can participate, but you can't participate effectively if you don't have information. Then empowerment is another key principle. So journalists play a big role in enabling the realization of the rights of everybody. If you can't speak out, you can't enjoy any right. You can't defend yourself. So press people are very, very key. But it places a huge responsibility on them. Because if you look at the international instruments, the one which provides for freedom of speech and expression also, unlike the other treaties, also provides for responsibilities, which shows you the magnitude of the responsibility of the press. So that's why we have what is called the ethics, the professional ethics. Journalism without professional ethics will be violating rights. It will not be facilitating the rights.
All right.
So the theme for tomorrow, for World Press Freedom Day, is about press for the planet. Actually, it's about the important role that the press plays in advancing environmental rights. It is we are actually looking at the current environmental crisis and the role of the media in helping the world manage this. So it is very critical. One, we have a crisis in the environment, but also it has become one of the most threatening bits because there are huge powers, there are business interests we are scrambling for Mother Earth because we are trying to exist. We want to push out the rest of the members of the ecosystem. We want to push them out. We are changing the world, deforestation, all these things that are happening. You have seen or read about the floods that are all over. So, what is the role
of the press? All right.
In managing this latest crisis?
Well, we have tried
but
our
World
best.
Press Freedom Day also is about looking at the safety of the journalists in trying to perform that role, because increasingly, because the environment crisis is the latest danger
to the world,
to the world, and the people who the responsibility is to expose these things for accountability, for empowerment, for environmental action. The media are also facing more and more threats.
All right. Well, as a media, I think on the issues of environment, we have showed you houses that are being built in wetlands. We have showed you people are encroaching on banks of waters. We have showed you people are cutting down forests. Yeah. But the side of implementing the law, there's no human rights based approach, just like we've been discussing the other laws. So it seems we have a big problem in implementing the laws. Let me come to Mr. Ogwal. Press freedom. Are journalists being tortured? Have you seen any?
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. When you listen to my friend Rosemary talk about tomorrow's theme about journalists and then the environment, we have really seen a very strong correlation between environmental journalists, and also torture. For example, when you look at what is really happening within our country, let's say I'm taking an example of the North Amuru, for example. There's a lot of, I would say, land grabbing. There's a lot of encroachment. There's a lot of charcoal burning. And this brings money to some of the businessmen. But the journalists are really standing so strong to speak about that, to talk about that. But we have seen in the course of their duty, in the course of doing that, they are attacked, they are tortured. So there is really a very strong link between environmental journalism and torture.
All right.
Because journalists who are doing that are being tortured as well.
All right, we have two comments coming in. One comment from David, he says, do security personnel on duty to control a riot or effect an arrest have a right to life? Well, there's been a discussion on the rights of the security agencies as they are operating, the issues of use of force, maximum use of force, when should it be applied. But this person is asking whether they also have a right to life. Then we have another comment coming in from Kue, who is listening in from Nalia. It says, the word human rights in Uganda, when I hear the word, my mind runs to a political party or one of the Attorney General's Department for torture victims who disappear almost every month. Some of us, we gave up hope in these human rights initiatives and their leaders. I think Parliament needs to amend the law to vote for the post of Human Rights Commission. Somebody actually thinks that Human Rights Commissioners, people who work in human rights issues, should actually be voted for. Let's respond to some of to these comments and also give our concluding remarks, because time is not on our side. I'll begin with you, Mr. Mugisa.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. Yes, one comment. Okay, my response to some of those comments, or to those two comments, is let's not lose hope. Uganda is our country, and once you have a parent or someone who is looking after you, then at all costs, that is the person who is charged with the duty until you leave their home. So Uganda is our country, is our mother, and we are not likely to leave it to go down the drain. We have to do everything we can, and for the people who have hope, it's never too late it's never too good to give up.
All right.
So let's continue with the fight. When you hear the word human rights and you shiver, you feel like there is nothing left, we can still tell you that yes, this discussion can continue to go on.
Yes, Rose, your closing remarks as we come to the end of the show.
The whole package of human rights that a human being needs is a lot, okay? The person is not complaining about maybe their right to leisure, maybe their right to eat, to food or something. So in some aspects, we are scoring. In some other aspects, there are still challenges. But the responsibility of human rights is everybody. Human rights protection and promotion is everybody's responsibility, because one violation of one right can actually lead to violation of several other rights.
All right.
Now, the one who said policemen have a right to life, certainly.
Yes.
Policemen have a right. Everyone has the right to life.
All right.
Security
So
apparatus.
even people who are demonstrating, they are supposed to be responsible. They have responsibilities.
All right.
And the most important thing in human rights protection is accountability.
Okay.
If a policeman is killed or hit, is there accountability for this?
All right.
Whether it is by a private individual or whether it is whoever it is.
Very quickly, Mr. Ogwal, in a few seconds, your closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we are all duty bearers and right holders in one way or the other as citizens of Uganda. And we are really supposed to speak for each other, be the voice of the voiceless, and we shouldn't give up. We remember the great civil rights activist, Martin Luther King. If he had given up on what he was doing,
All right.
then people would not be enjoying some of the rights we talk about today.
All right, with that, we come to the end of Spectrum today. Thank you very much, my dear guests, for being part of this discussion. And thank you very much, dear listeners, for tuning in from the time we started. I've been your host, Kenneth Lukwago-Anderson. Up next, we have the news in English with Miss Josephine Dagano. Thereafter, we'll have the Soul Train with BB Jr.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90.